Hey guys, this is part 2 to episode 18 of the Game of Thrones podcast. This is our continuing discussion of Fire and Blood Chapter 4, Sons of the Dragon.
But okay, so Preston, can you please sum up the closing arguments for Aenys so we can move on into Maegor? Take as much time as you want, because I know you wanted to rant a little bit about this. Please rant away. The floor is yours.
We have all these uprisings happening once Aenys comes into power, and they're all sequels to stuff that Aegon put down. So you have the Vale again, the Ironborn again, Harrenhal again, and the Dornish again through the Vulture King. The Vulture King's like one of the lords that is with the Vulture King, Weiss, like ends up getting his hand cut off by Stannis Baratheon, and then the Vulture King is put out there to die of exposure. And that's supposed to parallel Jaime, because when Jaime finally got to Vargo Hoat, the guy who's guilty of cutting off his hand, or at least ordering it, Vargo Hoat had all of his limbs cut off and fed to him. And it was like such a degree of like gross revenge that Jaime was like, oh, this isn't very satisfying at all. Like that's he was like really looking forward to getting revenge on Vargo Hoat, and then when he finds out what happened to Vargo Hoat, he's like, oh, that's horrible. But it wasn't. But with Sam Tarly, it wasn't that way. Sam Tarly comes in and says, all these people suck. I'm going to do the worst thing in the world to them. And, he got his full revenge. So there's kind of a little flip on things. And so then the big shift in everything with Aenys is when he has a stillborn daughter, Vela. And when Vela is stillborn, all of a sudden Maegor flips out and is angry about his wife being barren, or at least them not having children. And so, he takes a second wife, Alice Haraway. And then at this point, the Faith gets really angry because he's done polygamy, and they're so angry. And Aenys is like, "Oh, what are you doing, dude? I have to exile you." And so Maegor is exiled for 5 years or whatever. And that's kind of a big shift. And now Aenys is there all by himself, and Maegor is gone. And so now the war is starting to get pretty bad. And then weirdly, the minute Maegor leaves and the Faith is getting upset, Aenys decides to marry Rhaena to her brother Aegon the Uncrowned. And so it's a really weird moment, and this is actually a big one that I wanted to talk about, because he's at war and he's just exiled Maegor for pissing off the Faith, and the whole country is falling apart because of the Faith militant, and the High Septon is angry, and it's a big parallel to the High Sparrow movement and all of this. So why would Aenys do something so provocative at this moment? Like, why does he marry his daughter and son together? And I do have a theory on why Aenys, in the middle of this horrible situation, decides to provoke the Faith, even though he just did something to appease the Faith. Like exiling Maegor is appeasing the Faith. So why would Aenys, this weakling, whose whole kingdom is falling apart, all of a sudden piss off the Faith like this? And so my big theory is, when Aenys and Maegor were ruling as brothers, and Aenys kind of makes this a co-rule, even though Gildain is saying, oh, Aenys is the king and everybody thinks he's the king, Aenys clearly thinks he's co-ruling with Maegor. He kind of offers him that. And it works out. Like, they can say, okay, no brother to sister marriage. It works out if they can marry cousin to cousin. And so the Targaryen line, and what's special about the Targaryen line, like keeping the blood pure, getting the recessive genes necessary to ride dragons, can happen if both Maegor and Aenys are able to have children, because they can marry cousin to cousin. The Faith of the Seven was like, oh, no uncle to niece, no brothers to sister, but they seem to be fine with cousin to cousin. So as long as Maegor can have a kid, that kid can marry one of Aenys' kids, and the line of the dragon can continue. And actually, cross-cousin marriage is a very common old feudal practice. But the minute Maegor is unable to have kids, that system breaks down. And so the question is, how are you going to keep the blood of the dragon pure? How are you going to get the recessive genes together if you can't marry cousin, if this situation of marrying cousin to cousin isn't happening? I mean, you could maybe wait another generation to see what happens with the next kids, but at that point, you know, the recessive genes might be all gone or hard to figure out or something, or you miss a generation of dragon riders. A whole generation of people won't be able to hatch dragons. And so I think Aenys and Maegor were more in line with each other than people think. I think the two got along, and I think they had the same goals. I think they were talking about producing a dragon riding, house, and that if Maegor couldn't have kids, then Aenys needed to do something extreme, and so he needed to marry his kids together in order to produce more dragon riders. And so that's what I think happened. I think that, now that Maegor is proven to be sterile and he's gone and he's exiled, the future of House Targaryen relies on its incest, and so he marries Dreamfire Rhaena to Aegon the Uncrowned, and that super pisses off the Faith, and now there's a full-blown war.
And what's funny is he should have seen this coming, obviously, because you know how the Faith is. And as soon as he announces the marriage and has them, go around the realm, trying to do like a parade thing, the small folk don't receive them. They don't really give a fuck about them. And as soon as they, besieged at one of the castles in the Western lands by the Faith, right?
Yes, and this is an interesting thing because you can actually see how the Targaryens got tricked into fighting each other. Because Aenys dies at 35, and he supposedly looks like an old man, and they're like, oh, it's all because of stress. And it's like, he was probably poisoned. I mean, people don't die at 35 looking like old men unless something's seriously wrong.
Well, after the siege goes down, he collapses, I'm assuming from a stroke or something like that, and he goes to the Dragonstone, where Visenya looks after him, and supposedly she poisons him.
Yeah, I mean, who knows who poisoned him, but whatever the case, maybe it was Visenya, maybe it was the Faith, but I think, he definitely seems to be poisoned. But, right at that point, you look at it from the Faith's perspective or an anti-dragon perspective, and, if we're getting into Maester Marwyn's conspiracy of House Hightower and the Citadel and the Faith and the Old Town forces. If you look at it as in an anti-dragon conspiracy, they have, Rhaena and Aegon besieged, and Aenys is getting poisoned, and Maegor is exiled. You're pretty close to the end of House Targaryen, or at least dragon riding House Targaryen. And so really, Visenya, maybe she had to kill Aenys just to get Maegor back. It's a smart move if you're talking about the survival of House Targaryen. But she gets Maegor back. Aenys dies, so Maegor returns. And then what's funny is that, Maegor needs to take control of things. They need a strong leader to put down the Faith. And so he claims the kingship. But then Aegon the Uncrowned gets declared king as well by his mom, Alyssa Velaryon, which is a really dumb move. And so now you've got Targaryen versus Targaryen, because Maegor came back to save the house, but then he looks like a usurper because he came back to save the house and save his nieces and nephews, really. But he comes back and he looks like the bad guy. He looks like the usurper. And so in the end, Aegon the Uncrowned ends up battling Maegor on dragons, and Aegon the Uncrowned gets killed.
Wait a minute, are you trying to paint Maegor the Cruel as actually the hero of the story?
Yeah. I mean, at least at this point.
You do that? I
At
love
least
you,
at this
man.
point.
Really?
I mean, I'm just saying we're looking at it from Maegor's perspective, right? Maegor, like, look, like the whole kingdom's falling apart and your family is about to get destroyed. No one's taken control and you've got the biggest dragon around and, you're the only one that can save everybody. And you come back, you take control.
How is he trying to save his nephew and niece when he comes back and like the first thing you do is battle his nephew atop of the God's Eye and kills him and his dragon?
Well, that was after Aegon got crowned and declared his uncle a usurper.
So his uncle had to save face and go kick his ass.
It's just these are people in his way. I'm just
I love how you're trying to paint him as the good guy. That's funny.
I'm just saying it's more understandable. Like I think Maegor's. If you look at Maegor's goals, like we need to have a dragon riding House Targaryen for the future. If you look as a goal, a lot of his actions seem more reasonable.
Okay. So Maegor comes back. He takes the throne, and he can't let Aegon the Uncrowned stand in his way because as long as Aegon lives, then his rule will be questioned. He goes over there. Aegon tries to meet him in the field. Balerion is a much bigger dragon than Quicksilver, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And they end up
and
killing each other.
Aegon had hardly any riding experience at this point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they end up fighting, and Maegor kills his nephew, and his niece runs away to Fair Isle.
Right, and this gets into the Rhaena. You're making a big deal out of it, but Rhaena being a lesbian, her old lover Melanie dies at the same time as Aegon, and so they're like, oh, she was so sad for her husband. It's like, well, her lover died at the same time,
Wait, I'm making a big deal? You're the one saying that she's a lesbian. What are you coming at me for? You're alluding that she's a lesbian. I just think she has a best friend, but whatever.
She has a lot of really great friends.
Why not?
That's fine. But nonetheless, then Aegon goes into full blown kill everybody mode and trying to have a kid, which just isn't going to happen.
Well, I would also attribute that to his first wife, the Hightower woman, being unable to have children herself, and then Tyanna of the Tower, who he picks up while in exile in Essos, also throwing a monkey wrench into those plans as well.
Yeah, I mean, he has, 6 wives total, or 6 lovers and wives total? Yeah, I mean, he just keeps trying. But and I have various theories on why he's like, clearly Maegor is the problem, not the women. So I think maybe that Maegor has Klinefelter syndrome, which
what the hell is that?
That's where you have XXY chromosomes. But I don't know. But then other people are like, but he's really strong. I was like, oh, Klinefelter.
Wait, go into more. What's the syndrome called?
Klinefelter syndrome.
Klinefelter syndrome. Like, go into more detail. Like, what is that? What
so you
know
how women have double X chromosomes and men have an XY chromosome?
Okay.
Well, every once in a while, when one in 1,000 live births, your sperm doesn't split or the egg doesn't split right. So normally you have an X and a Y chromosome, and when your cells split for sperms, that's split in half through meiosis or not, and so some sperms have X's and some sperms have Y's. Well, in Klinefelter syndrome, there's not the right split, and so a sperm gets both an X and a Y in one of them. Or it happens on the egg side. The eggs don't, with the women, your X's are split, and so every egg has a single X. But in Klinefelter, you might get a double X over there. So either through a double X in the egg and a Y sperm comes in, boom, you've got XXY, or an X egg and an XY sperm comes in, boom, you have XXY. And so you've got 3 chromosomes in there instead of 2. And so various weird things happen to the body on Klinefelter syndrome. Men have a little more boobs. They're sterile. The men are sterile. But the problem is that the downside of this is actually Maegor is considered very, very strong, while Klinefelter people tend to have weaker muscles and reduced strength. Though they are supposed to be taller than average and stuff like that. And they're supposed to have less muscles and coordination, though Maegor is pretty fucking awesome. So there's definitely some weaknesses to the theory, but it was just mainly about like, if he was able to, why they might fear Maegor more than anybody else or something. But, maybe he was super special. He had, more psychic ability because of his double X. It's kind of a little crazy theory that I had, but there's a lot of things that contradict it. But nonetheless, Maegor is sterile, and Klinefelters were sterile.
I almost feel bad for Maegor because Maester Gildain does this quite a bit. He almost makes it sound like Maegor was cursed for his war on the faith, and that's why he was, as we would say, infertile. But I also feel like there's, I don't know, you're making me think like there's this like grander conspiracy against Maegor by the faith that has so many players attached to it.
Right, like at first I could say, okay, well, with his first wife, you could maybe argue that there was a conspiracy to not have him have kids. That her name was pretty close to Cersei. Her
Wasn't it like Serace or something like that?
Yeah,
something like that.
And we know that like Cersei was purposely not letting Robert have kids, right? Mm-hmm. And so one could argue that she was doing the same thing, but the problem is that Maegor goes and has all these other women in foreign countries, no less, away from the faith of the Seven, and so somehow, it'd have to be a massive conspiracy for all of these women to not have his kids. But so Maegor is just sterile. I think that's just the luck of the draw, or maybe the luck of Klinefelter syndrome. I don't know, my little theory, but nonetheless, he's not having any kids. He's sterile.
But I would argue that Maegor is probably the most interesting king in the first 50 years of Targaryen rule. He comes back from exile, kills some of his family members, breaks many traditions, and even goes after the faith. The guy just does whatever he wants, and I kind of love it. This is the type of like TV show I would like to see. Maybe like a season or two, just of like Maegor and the events around him.
Maegor has an interesting life. He does, and so he travels. He has all these different wives. He's a crazy character. But you could also, it's funny though. In the same respect, like you could say like Game of Thrones wasn't as good once Joffrey died. You
think so?
He's such a great character, like a love to hate character, not he's and this puts him apart from say Ramsay, because no one loves to hate Ramsay. They just hate Ramsay. Like Ramsay is just evil, evil, evil. But Joffrey was more, and this is more about show Joffrey versus book Joffrey, because book Joffrey is more hateable than show Joffrey.
Book Joffrey's a brat. That's the type of brat you just hate. Show Joffrey is like bratty, but like you could I get what you're coming from.
Right. There was just something. There was some way that the actor, Jack Gleason played him, where you kind of he's so horrible, but at the same time you kind of like him just because he's such a douche. Mm-hmm. It's something. There's something strange about it to love to hate him. Mm-hmm. While Ramsay is just pure evil. And so not that Joffrey is not evil, but he's not pure evil like Ramsay. How bad can someone be? So. But so Maegor, I think like. He would have been interesting in a show, like especially if you tried to portray things from his side. Like the text obviously the Gildain is very anti Maegor, but going through, I could make some arguments for Maegor's side.
I want to see this video from you. Why Maegor was really the good guy. I want to see this video.
There's always that one video,
but there's always that one video where like how Palpatine was secretly the good guy all the time. What? What are you, crazy?
Well, no, Palpatine blew up a planet. And it's true that Maegor went around burning people, like burning a lot of people. But at the same time, Aegon the Conqueror went around burning all these people. And so what's the difference between him and Aegon the Conqueror? So it's the winners write history. It kind of gets back to like, why is Augustus Caesar looked on fondly, but Caligula is not? It's like, one guy ended up winning, and so historians treated him well, and one guy, was killed by a coup. So it's just,
I will admit one thing. At first, I was kind of annoyed that this was Gildane instead of George himself. But now I kind of like it better once you explain it that way, because you're absolutely right. History looks kindly on those who win. But Maegor the Cruel, I still gotta say, I love this character. He may be a douche, but at the same time, like, he fights for everything. He has to fight the faith at every fucking turn, and he wins most of the time.
Yeah, and in fact, the only, in my opinion, the only saving grace of Fire and Blood and all of these stories is the fact that it's written by a maester. Like, some people think it's a cop-out, like, oh, well, now we don't have a definitive history. We don't really know what happened. But I think it's the only thing that makes the text interesting, is to read it and go, well, that's not true. Or, oh, no, that's true. Or, oh, clearly this is what really happened. Like, the only thing that's fun about reading it is going through and going, wow, this seems biased, like, and the challenge of puzzling out what really happened. Other than that, it would just be, the rhyming stuff and people dying and people with the same names, doing similar stuff, so.
But you're saying that there's a conspiracy between the Hightowers and the Faith to make sure that Maegor does not have a kid. And do you think that conspiracy also extends to Tanya of the Tower? Because it is revealed later on that after, was it both of his wives or one of them, they give birth to stillborn children or monsters. At one point, one of them had wings and no legs. Tanya reveals that under torture that she poisoned those women to give him no kids. Do you think Tanya was in on it?
Well, that would be, yeah, well, actually, that would explain everything. I mean, it's funny because they, obviously, the having wings and everything, like, is a parallel to Dany, and we know that Dany was, or at least Dany believes that she was poisoned by Mirri Maz Duur to produce a stillborn. So it's true that of all the she was from Pentos, not Bravos, but say this one woman were in on it, and she poisoned the other women so that they wouldn't have kids, and then the one is a Hightower. Well, now the conspiracy's, it's not as big. It's only 2 women in on it, So maybe that takes away my Klinefelter syndrome. Then you're saying that Maegor actually is fertile, and he just, somebody was behind the scenes, like, poisoning his wives so that they wouldn't have kids. That's, now it's piquing my interest in, like, what really happened. There's so many ideas on what could, like, it's too bad that we'll never really know, because this is all the history we're ever going to get. But yeah, I mean, with 5-6 women and no kids, the first assumption is that the problem is Maegor. But it's funny if it were actually a conspiracy of his wives, or a couple of the wives.
But the Hightowers and the Faith, they were in on it together.
Well, that's the thing, is the Hightowers, Faith, and Citadel, that's an easy conspiracy because they're all in Old Town, and they all have connections to each other. Like, the Hightowers are patrons of both, and they've got their network of maesters and septons to do stuff. And then Maegor's first wife is a Hightower. So you can just say, honey, when you go off to Maegor, make sure you do not have a kid. Take your moon tea, do all your things, or be like Cersei, and only give oral sex or whatever. Which is what, that's what Cersei did. But then the thing is when he goes off into exile and he marries this what's her, something of the Tower, Tanya of the Tower,
Tiana of the Tower.
Tiana of the Tower. Like, how do you get her in the conspiracy? She revealed that she did this?
Yeah, and when he's torturing her in the black cells, I believe, if I remember correctly. And the way I guess you could also include this is that the Faith really didn't want him to have, by your conspiracy, the Faith really didn't want him having any offspring. So maybe they contacted her somehow, or maybe she was secretly with them the entire time. I guess
the problem is that it's a confession under torture, and you know that a confession under torture is worthless. And we have the parallel of the Faith. I mean, Cersei torturing the Blue Bard and getting all of these things out of him about his affairs and them being false. So, yeah, I mean, maybe like Tiana of the Tower was in on it, but it sounds more like that she was innocent and he was just torturing her, and she confessed to something under torture, and that he was sterile. That would be my guess.
Well, keep in mind that this could still be a thing, considering that Maegor's wives were Alice Haraway, and the other one was Jane Westerling. And the same thing would happen to Eleanor Costain. So those
Eleanor,
two women...
Oh, right. So Haraway, Westerling, and Costain wouldn't need to be in on the. So Eleanor did actually get pregnant. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, who knows? They could have been having sex with whoever, but the Hightower woman would still not want to have Maegor's kid because she'd be working for the Faith. But the question is, how did the Faith get Tiana to do her bidding?
Well, they probably could have. I would argue they probably promised her that they would remove Maegor and make her queen or something like that. No clue. Maybe offer her a higher position, or I mean, what really would be? Well, do you remember what the text says was her reasoning for poisoning those babes?
It's none. There's none given. Tiana's like a daughter of a Pentoshi magister, and she was first a prostitute, and then she might have been the lesbian paramour of Alice Haraway, but yeah, there's no motive for it, unfortunately. Though, and she was actually his mistress of whispers, so it seems like she was probably loyal to him. So it was all strange.
So with her no motive, I guess that conspiracy could stand, because once again, the Hightower girl, it seems that she, whether or not she wanted to have Maegor's child or not doesn't matter, because Tiana only poisoned Haraway, Westerling, and Costain.
Yeah.
So she could be on the conspiracy. Motive,
right? But I just don't. Yeah, I don't know what her motive would be. I have no idea about motive. I mean, even if she's lovers with Alice Haraway, I'm not sure why she would poison all of these people's women, all these people's babies and whatever. So who knows?
So while Maegor is planning to strike back at the Faith that are popping up all over the place, he hears that Alyssa's other son, Jaehaerys, is being propped up to take over as the rightful king, and is being supported by many houses, and most specifically the Baratheons, Rhaegar Baratheon.
Rhaegar Robar, yeah.
Yeah, he's...
Because he's the one that claims, he proclaims Jaehaerys to be the true king.
And many other houses are also coming to the side. Everybody's turning on Maegor, with the exception of a few lords, some of them lesser. And a lot of them lose kind of like their steam when they see there aren't any great houses on Maegor's side. And eventually, as some lords were leaving the throne room, Maegor goes and sits on the Iron Throne. And then, I believe it was Haraway who finds him somehow pierced on the swords of the throne from his, kind of almost like, what was it, like from his back, and the swords are coming through his arms and through his neck.
Right. I mean, clearly he was murdered by somebody. And so the question is who. I would probably say, that one of his Kingsguard or something.
Yeah, let me throw one theory out there.
Huh.
Faceless men.
I mean,
why the fuck not? I mean,
why the fuck not?
Why the fuck not, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's supposed to be. I mean, I guess they say right here, Kingsguard might have done the deed, which would require them to act in concert. Two posted at the door. So maybe Faceless Man.
It's funny because the Faceless Men were mentioned in this very same chapter as having been a candidate for assassinating Septim Moon, yet Gildane, I believe, says that they are meticulous about how they go about it, and that the killing of Septim Moon was kind of sloppy, which it kind of was, but that the Faceless Men take great care to make the killings appear natural, so nobody suspects foul play, which makes sense. Like, if you're going to be a prestigious assassin order, you're gonna, go above and beyond, like, how you go about your job. But his death here is so bizarre and so random that it could be Faceless Men, but so many people have sat on that chair so many times, yet this is the first time it happens. I don't know, it's so weird, so I'm gonna go with Faceless Men.
Right.
So...
yeah. I mean, I think Faceless Man, yeah. I mean, obviously we're supposed to think of Courtney Penrose and how he was mysteriously murdered as well and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
People just dying. So yeah, Shadow Baby. I think Faceless Man is probably a pretty good, because the first thing you think of is Kingsguard, but then the Gildane says, oh, a Kingsguard might have done it, which makes me go, oh, so I guess it wasn't a Kingsguard because he suggested it. I'm eliminating that option.
That's a good rule of thumb. Whenever George says, well, it could be this guy, it's not that guy.
I guess not. Oh. Yeah, so... yeah, but I guess...
And it's funny, it's brought up in the same chapter that it's a matter of pride for the Faceless Men to make it look like a natural occurrence. Obviously, a guy sitting on a fucking throne made of swords and being pierced by those swords, I guess you could argue that he leaned on it the wrong way, but at the same time, are you fucking kidding me?
No one's going to do that.
No one's going to do that, but at the same time, I mean... like, one of the other options was, for his death, he probably committed suicide. How the fuck do you commit suicide the way he did? What the fuck?
Yeah. Now, I do wonder why House Velaryon, they keep mentioning House Velaryon was one of the first ones to go over. I do wonder why House Velaryon abandoned Maegor so readily. I mean, actually, the answer is pretty easy. All of these children are Velaryon children. Mm-hmm. Aenys' wife was a Velaryon. So
and also
I guess
because Jaehaerys was getting a stronger claim and people were rallying to his side a bit faster.
Yeah, plus, I mean, Jaehaerys is half Velaryon, so the answer is right there. Mm-hmm. And of course they're gonna support a Velaryon. Yeah, and then so finally we get to the end of Maegor dying. God, that was just a behemoth.
It was... how many pages would you say? It was 51 pages?
Yeah, ends on 113.
I'm sure we skipped some things here and there, but like I said, I actually really
passed over like all of the battle shit. Like,
that's fine. No, it's battle stuff. Like, what the fuck do you want?
Yeah, it was 53 pages. Huge chunk of this book.
But this is why I said, like, every chapter of this book, in and of itself, could be essentially, maybe every chapter or two could be like a season. Like an anthology series for Game of Thrones, the Targaryen King, like Fire and Blood. Like, we could, like, the Sons of the Dragon itself, that could be its own friggin' season. Because even the battles are all cool. You got Dick Bean, raising a sword, But
the problem is even Sons of the Dragon, like, the time period is longer than, say, Game of Thrones. You know? Like, it's such a long period of time.
Once again, you could do an animated thing about it, but I really like the whole Maegor chapter. I think this is one of my favorite chapters that we've covered so far.
Oof, even though it was so long. I do think that a lot of the battle stuff that went on a bit long, like, we didn't need a description of all the little, fights here and there that Maegor had.
No, we didn't need... I think we need a description of all the fights he did have, because all those fights were really cool. What I don't think we need a description of was all the random enemies that he accumulated and all the people in their, in their retinue. For example, that fat Faith militia leader guy that I told you about got his throat sliced. Yeah. When he dies, like, 2 more dudes rise up from his own camp and try to do a thing. Like, we didn't need their names. Like, their names were really unnecessary. And also the names of, like, the 7 guys that fight for Maegor and the 7 guys that fight for the Warrior Sons. We didn't need their names or descriptions. There's a lot of, like, names thrown of characters that only get, like, 2 sentences of mention. And that's it.
What's funny is when a random character is thrown in, and then because you're getting a bunch of random ones, and then all of a sudden, like 40 pages later, a random one will come back, and you're like, who is that motherfucker? And you got to go back, and be like, oh, right,
That guy.
Because all those other random people didn't come back, but this random guy did, and it was significant. Oh God. Oh.
Look, I like covering the book. Don't get me wrong. I do. It's just, there really is a lot to go to, but you have to jump a lot. You do, because there are a lot of, like, information that I wouldn't say it's useless, but it's really not worth covering. Like the battle stuff. Once again, cool, but at the same time, I mean...
Yeah. No, I mean, it's certainly fun going through it like this. You know, I could imagine someone by themselves without the same sort of like dork level knowledge as you and me, like being like, what the hell is this?
Dork level knowledge. This is what I said in my video. Like, you need a map. You need like a map and a family tree.
You need a map, a family tree, and you need a dork level knowledge on top of it. Like, even like if I'm sitting there going, oh wait, which Viserys was this? Wait, which Aegon was this? God damn it! Like, just think about the average random.
By the way, the Sweet Robin picture you use, that's from Polly M. Polly-M on DeviantArt. If you can, leave the link to this person DeviantArt page in your description, dude, because they also have a really cool House Targaryen complete family tree, which is what I used while reading this book, and god damn, you gotta use this. Because it really helps out a lot. And also having a map of Westeros. Just Google up Westeros map. Make sure it's you go to tools and then size large. Because you need like a
Poly M is hilarious because you go to the family tree on DeviantArt and it's written under it, I don't even like House Targaryen. Why did I do this?
Well, I gotta give them, I don't know if it's a male or female, but I gotta give him or her huge props because every single character is distinct and different and has like an aura of like an aura of like character about them. It's crazy. And no offense to
Polly M is a female from France.
From where?
From France.
Just say France. Don't be an asshole. Just fucking say France. Props to her. And no offense to Amok, who is also a great artist as well. But I love this family tree. She did a magnificent job. Props to her. Definitely leave her DeviantArt if you can in the description, because awesome. For those of you who don't like to look at the description because you're a douchebag, it's Polly, P-O-L-Y -M at DeviantArt. So... props to her for helping us out with this, because that's what I'm using.
It is a really beautiful family tree that has just all the character. She has some great stuff. She has some great art of all the characters from the Vale as well, and different places, and
she did your Sweet Robin thing, right?
She did. She did.
All right, Preston, you want to wrap it up here?
Sure, yes.
Okay. Guys, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Game of Thrones podcast. Keep in mind that we do have our own Game of Thrones podcast channel where we have previous episodes compiled all on there. So if you want to go back and check that stuff out, I'm going to upload the mini episodes on there fairly soon so you can binge the hell out of that. I'll leave, Preston, please leave a link in the description below since this will be on your channel, please. It should be youtube.com/c/Game of Thrones podcast. That's what it should be. Preston, we have any videos coming up from you?
Nothing. I mean, just my regular fare. Prepping for winter, Night's Watch, and prepping for winter. I'm moving into the Tyrion chapters. I've always got my What You're Missing with the show, and always working on Night's Watch.
You're catching up pretty quickly on the What You're Missing stuff.
Oh yeah, no, we're coming to the end of that. I think I'm on working on episode 6.7.
What happens when
Yeah.
you reach the end of what you're missing and the prepping for winter chapters? What happens then? Are you gonna go over through all the entire books? Oh god, it's gonna
I
take
don't know.
ages.
I don't
But
know. We'll see. We'll see.
would
We'll
you
see.
do like? Would you go actually back to a Game of Thrones and cover chapter by chapter? Because that's what a lot of the other Throne channels are doing. And I know you and I always strive not to do what other people are doing, but would you actually do that?
I was thinking if I get to the end of prepping for winter, doing something like epilogue, or John 13, like one of those last chapters, or Bran 3.
Mm-hmm.
There is that idea.
Actually, you know what's something a lot of people don't actually cover, and I would like to see you tackle it, is a lot of the stuff outside of the main series, like Dunk and Egg stuff, Rogue Prince, and stuff like that. Would you be inclined to cover that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We could even cover
I
it on
always,
here.
I always want to do. I always want to do. But it's just never enough time. But yeah, I always want to do everything. I mean, I want to go through. It's like I want to go through like this line by line or paragraph by paragraph, but that would just be too much work.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us on this episode once again. We will see you all next time. Have a good one.